Hey everybody, I am back with Angie Arreola, mental health counselor who specializes in supporting our youth and nurturing our future generations. I was lucky enough to talk her into coming back today. She is just full of information that everybody that lives in this world needs to hear. So she was gracious enough to come back and share some more of her wisdom, insight, and guidance with us today. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you. It was not a hard sell to get me back. You're so much fun to talk to that I forget I'm on a podcast and not just
Well, that's
having a fun
perfect.
conversation.
That's perfect. That's what I hope it's like. I hope that people that visit me here can just flow with the discussion in a transparent and open manner. So thank you for being comfortable in this space. So I think today we were going to really sort of dive in deeper to specific things that might be weighing heavy on kids' plates today, that of which might be specific pressures that maybe something that you and I felt in our own youth, and maybe it's evolved quite a bit and it's new territory for everybody. What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, that is such a big and broad question that I would say being a kid today is much harder. That's where I would like to start, is really just kind of saying it. I feel like it's much harder these days than it was when we were young and when we were growing up. In some ways, there's some pieces that are a little easier, but I mean, if I had to take like an overview and say, is it harder, easier, or the same? I'm going to go with it's a little harder being a kid nowadays than it was when we were growing up. And I think part of that is just how small the world has gotten. There's access to so much information now. And while it can be very informative, it can be a wonderful thing, right? To be able to access, pull out your phone and get answers to literally any question at all. Perfect example, just last night, I was talking to somebody about, Disneyland in Paris, and they were like, oh gosh, I wonder what that would be like. Just, that I might be nervous to go because I don't speak French. And I was like, I bet they speak English. So I Googled, right? I pulled out my phone and I was able to look up, is everyone at Disneyland Paris fluent in English? And they are, if anyone's wondering. But this person had some anxieties about, and this was an adult, about traveling abroad to a country where they don't speak the language to go to Disneyland. But like I could find that answer in under a minute. I could get them that answer. And I think, as adults, we have this capacity to filter through good information, bad information, and to turn information off when we need a break. And kids are developing those skills. They're developing the skill to turn off. Kids are, if you haven't noticed, they are all in creatures. They are not, they are in it, or they are all in or all out, right? There's not very much in between. Even with our adolescents, when they're like, I guess, if you ask them, do you like this or do you enjoy this? I guess it's okay. But once they get rolling, either they are in and they enjoy that activity, or they're going to let you know, now I'm out. And our really young kids they're developing those capacities, those skills to turn off. And so when you are living in a world that's fast paced and just has all sorts of information coming at you from all angles, it's all very fast and it can become overwhelming. And if you don't know how to turn it off, if you don't know how to settle yourself or control your breathing, or why your body is even responding in the way that it's responding to certain things that you're seeing and experiencing, you can get overwhelmed pretty quickly. So, I always like to tell parents and, just adults in general to keep that in mind. Our kids are being bombarded with so many different and oftentimes even conflicting messages. And so we have to be that home base for them and help teach those skills of how to turn it off, how to filter through the information, what's quality information versus information that just is, for lack of a better description, spam or noise. And our kids are facing a lot of different things that we didn't necessarily, maybe we faced it when we were young. I like to take the example of bullying, right? Bullies have been around since the beginning of time. Um, but oftentimes when we were kids, the bullying stayed at school, and then we went home where, mom oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes was like there when we arrived. Um, or an adult was there when we arrived, and we received that reassurance. We got that break, that reprieve from bullying, and we got to spend the evening doing our homework, playing with the neighbor kids, going outside. It was a more relaxed evening. Sometimes if you were involved in an after school activity, you got home a little bit later, but it wasn't this mad dash all over to all sorts of different activities. It was a slower pace. Nowadays, if you're bullied at school, there's not necessarily a reprieve from that, because you get home and you turn on your video game, which our generation did as well. But your current video games are connected to the internet. And who's on the internet but your bullies, right? And so they find you after school too. There's no reprieve. There's no downtime. There's no opportunity to build you back up. You might then have dinner with your family where you're told how special and amazing and awesome you are, but that's not enough to counter the hours upon hours that you just went through at school and then on the internet. And then if you've got access to social media accounts, sometimes it continues and carries on there. And so it's much harder for parents to build their kiddos up and then send them back into the school doors the next morning. There's just not enough time, there's just not enough to build them back up, put them back together, to go back in there. And so that's just one example of a way that, that's something that was around when we were kids, but it's different now. I will say schools have done a lot to address it, right? There's been zero tolerance policies implemented. There's been all sorts of things that schools have done to address these sorts of situations, but nothing's foolproof. And there's not a one size fits all solution to these sorts of things. Even zero tolerance policies, I think, while well-intentioned, fall short in many ways. And it's not always because they failed to apply them. Sometimes it's, a kiddo who is the bully, and yes, it needs to be addressed, but a zero tolerance policy or that involves, expelling that student could make the situation worse for that child. And while that child is engaging in behavior that's unacceptable, and I do want to make that clear, they're just not as well developed to handle these social situations as we are. And when they're in them ill-equipped, we can't just wash our hands of them and say, okay, we're done with you. Yeah. There needs to be intervention. So I could go on and on about offering all sorts of different examples for how childhood has changed nowadays. But, overall, it's just much more fast-paced than when we were young. And because the world has gotten smaller, we're more aware. Our kids anyway, are more aware of the bad stuff that happens out there.
Would you say that, going back a second there in what you were talking about, bullying specifically,
sure.
Is it correct to say that there isn't really a good or bad child? Bullying is a byproduct of something that they're going through, not that it excuses it or makes the behavior okay, but isn't that a child that is in need of help?
Yes. In my experience, yes. So kids can sometimes be pretty cruel, but I love the way that you said, there's no such thing as a bad kid. I would agree. There's no such thing as a bad kid. If a child is excluding someone else or bullying somebody else, you're going to get a much bigger bang for your buck if you can get to the bottom of what's going on with that kiddo. Why do they feel the need to engage in the behaviors that they're engaging in? When it comes to kids, behavior is communication. There's something going on. Why is that child being mean to that other child? Did they get a message that that child is broken in some sort of way, or odd, or weird, or whatever other awful adjective you can come up with? And so the somewhat natural human response of, oh gosh, like I don't want to be associated with that person who's different, right? Because remember, as humans, we're hardwired to be suspicious of different. It's just evolution. Evolution has wired us to be suspicious to keep ourselves alive. And
That's so interesting
we
that you
have
say
to-
that.
Yeah. And so we have to diligently work to teach our kids that different doesn't automatically equal dangerous or bad, right? Different doesn't mean bad. Different is just it's just that, it's just different. And so rather than be suspicious, be curious. That's different. Tell me more about that. I want to know more about that. I need more information because this is different, right?
Yeah, maybe that's an opportunity to ask questions versus point fingers or turn the other way even.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this goes back to something that we had mentioned the last time we spoke with regard to, like, we were never taught how to have hard conversations, right? I remember being taught to don't point, right? The first time I pointed at somebody, I vividly remember this, and I couldn't have been any more than 5 years old, because as I'm recalling this memory, I'm recalling what we were sitting, out front of my family home, and there was a gentleman across the street who was walking with a limp. And I remember pointing and saying to my mom, like, why is he walking like that? Or what's wrong? Or I asked something along those lines. And I remember being scolded, don't point. It's bad to point. Like, don't.
Yeah. That's so, I mean, I can't even believe you brought that up, because I literally just posted something, a question recently. Is staring the same thing, or no, is people watching the same thing as staring? And is it just as rude? Right.
Yeah.
And to me, I can remember the same thing you're talking about. Being a kid, my sister teased me all the time about staring at people. Stop staring. That's so rude. Stop staring.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I think as a kid, you don't have the filter to really quite understand the inappropriateness of that.
Sure.
But staring or people watching, whatever we want to call it, I feel like is a way to learn too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as a society, we have made that like a dirty word or a dirty type of practice to people watch or to stare at people. But really, how do you learn about different people and different types of cultures without observing, aka staring?
Staring, right? Yeah. And I'm glad that you said observing, because that's exactly what I was going to say is, oftentimes kids will just observe adult behavior and mimic it, right? How many times has any parent think back to when your kids were a toddler, and the first time that they tried to mimic your behavior of cleaning, right? Of, you're dusting something and then they come up behind you and want to dust too, or you're vacuuming and they want, a mini vacuum cleaner. I mean, this is why the toy industry has these toys, right? Because they know, the toy industry knows that kids observe and mimic behavior. And so why not corner that market and provide, the little toy vacuum cleaner that sucks up little scraps, and the toy kitchen set, and the, washer and dryer and all the other things that they've come up with and cleverly marketed. And it's really because these, our kiddos are observing us. And, I think this is the hard part of my job, right? Because when I get asked some of these questions about, like, okay, is observing or is people watching the same as staring? And okay, we all know we're not supposed to stare and that's a bad thing, but people watching doesn't sound so bad, right? And so I sometimes get asked these questions of, well, what do you do, right? What do you do when you come across somebody who's different? How do you handle that? How do you have that conversation? And how should my mom have responded rather than like, don't point, right? Like, and I get that. I totally, as a parent myself now, I totally understand that knee-jerk reaction of don't point, right? Because we as parents don't want to be judged as failing to teach our kids manners.
That's correct.
Right? Like,
correct.
Yeah, it falls back on us, right? And the pressures we feel as parents, speaking of pressures, to do well and be well and do it right. And so, you know, when people ask you, okay, what do we do? What do I do when my kid notices someone who's different? I always encourage you to not shy away, not shy away. Instead, comment on something that's positive. So I'm thinking specifically of when my boys were toddlers, and we were at Costco, and I mean, who doesn't love Costco? And we were in line, and they were my youngest was probably not even talking much. But it was the first time that they'd seen a Black baby. My very best friend is Black, but at the time she didn't have any children. And so they'd seen Black adults, but no Black. And so my son was like, Mom, look at that baby. And I knew, I mean, you know your child, right? And so I looked at him and I said, isn't she adorable? She's so beautiful and cute and cuddly and squishy. She's so tiny. Her mom was so lucky to have her. Right. So he didn't know what to do with a baby that looked different. And so I told him what to do with a baby that looks different. You talk about how cute and cuddly and squishy it is, and that their mama's so lucky to have them, and that they're loved. And so it's just setting the example of how to respond, right? So what's wrong with that person? Oh, there's nothing wrong with them. You must be commenting about, or you must be curious about, and then naming what you're seeing. The way they're walking, the way that they're talking, you know, physical differences. You must be curious about the way they look, right? And then open that door for questions. You know, what questions do you have?
I think that's so good. Normalizing that it's okay to inquire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of shying away from the discussion, like you just said, when we were kids, you just did not have the conversation. It was just don't point, mind your business.
Right. And kids, when we avoid or dodge certain topics, kids internalize that as, oh gosh, it must be so bad it's unspeakable. And so when something is unspeakable, it's you have to avoid it. You have to avoid it at all costs. It's so bad, we can't even talk about it.
You know, I can only hope that, you know, as you and I and other people around us are identifying this need to speak with our kids and to have these conversations with our kids, and that this change is occurring in our society to open the door to more conversation that will maybe correct some of the things that our generation learned. Like, I think that oftentimes the pressures that kids feel to look a certain way or to appear to look a certain way is a better way to say it, I think, is because of people staring and thinking that something is different or not normal about them. Because like you just said, if you're not going to have a conversation and talk about it, then, well, it must not be good. So the pressure to look a certain way, I think, is honestly manifested in a lot of those early moments with people, well-meaning people probably at the time, but really inflicting their own fears on younger people to, I guess, be appropriate. And really, you're just kind of telling them to just, that's not something we talk about. They look different than you. Well, let's not talk about it. And it almost internalizes those pressures of wanting to look a certain way.
Yeah. Look
or
a certain
present a
way,
certain
be
way.
a certain way. Yeah. Fit the mold.
Yeah.
Because if we can't talk about people who are different, then that must mean I don't ever want to be different. I have to be the same as everyone else. I have to be what's expected of me. I have to do what's expected of me. And sometimes those expectations are unrealistic. And children do not know how to filter that out. They don't know how to filter out unrealistic expectations. They don't know how to filter out a lot of what society is feeding them intentionally, might I add, right?
Mhm.
Your hair's not shiny enough, buy this shampoo. You're overweight, try this diet, right? You want to be this way, buy this product. All the way down to, I marveled for a while there about how kids don't have kids don't have to sit through commercials anymore, right?
Mm.
And the mom in me, the therapist in me was like, oh gosh, that's awesome that like commercials have been eliminated, right? Like, no, gone are the days where like products are marketed to kids and they want this toy because it's been presented some sort of way on the TV. But I think we're circling back, and we're not, now like a lot of these streaming services have ads now that they're running, right? I mean, sure, you could still watch Netflix, but if you've got a kiddo, and I would say most families have a kiddo who's watching, YouTube content on YouTube, they're coming across ads. They're coming across those ads again. They're back.
They're gonna find a way to sneak that in.
Better than ever. Yeah. And that's the thing is it's not even that they're finding a way to take it in. It's that they're taking in the things that they enjoy. Maybe it's, if they're young, it's Blippy unboxing something new, right? Or new Blippy song. But then it cuts to an ad where your child can't necessarily make the distinction between, oh, Blippy has stopped and an ad has started and they're marketing to me. And so I don't really need this toy. They're just trying to hawk their crap at me. They don't have that ability. Even as they get older, probably not until middle school do they really fully comprehend, you're trying to sell me stuff.
Mhm.
And so they get these messages of all these different things that they need, and all their shortcomings because they don't have whatever item is being marketed.
Yeah.
And they're inundated with messages of what will make them better, superior, and who doesn't want to be the best, right? We live in a very individualistic society where we really kind of push each other, ourselves, our kids to be the best, right? We tell our kids all the time, like, just try your best, and I think while well-intentioned, sometimes kids get confused that they don't understand that wording quite the way that we mean it. We mean try your individualistic best, right? Our kids sometimes will internalize that as like be the best.
Mm.
And so that's another pressure that they sometimes feel, to be the best. We do live, for better for worse, in a society that's always striving. And not that that's inherently a bad thing to always be striving, but there also has to be downtime. There also has to be that rest, that time for just nothingness.
Yeah. And that's so rare with our kids these days. And bringing it back to, I guess, that thriving, striving mentality and almost the competitiveness, especially I think as kiddos get a bit older, to just excel at everything they're doing, everything from academics to sports to, you know, uh, socially with their
Mhm.
friends. And I think it's pretty demanding, those pressures on them. I
Yeah.
think I saw some numbers, some 76% of kids feel a lot of pressure to just have those top-notch grades year after year after year. And I don't know if that's because of just consequences or if they feel a sense of failure or if they're
Yeah.
told that their future is jeopardized. But even, I don't know. There's a lot of me that feels like there's more than one way to progress in life, and not that you don't want your
Mhm.
children to do well in school, but it's not everything about their life, and if they are struggling in something and if they do need some extra help, or maybe they're just never going to be awesome at whatever it is,
Right.
like that's okay, right? It doesn't
Yes.
mean that they're a failure as a person.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, if your child falls within the bell curve, right? If they are average, they're going to do, for the most part, they're going to do okay at school. But if they fall outside of that bell curve in any way, so they look different, they have some sort of special need that puts them outside of that curve, they learn a little bit differently. I'm thinking of, our ADD, ADHD, or any sort of neurotypical kid. If they fall outside of that, they are at an increased risk. And if we're being totally candid here, what the hell is normal anyway, right?
Right.
So you might think you've got a normal kid, but you don't. And so when they fall outside of that bell curve, school is a challenge. School's going to be harder in some way. And when our kids spend most of their time in school, we really have to take a look at how does my child fit in this environment? And do they need some sort of accommodation, or do I need to do a better job of counteracting some of those unintended messages that they might be getting at school? Schools are phenomenal places. They are home base for so many students. I mean, again, if we're being candid, this is the only place where some students eat, right? They don't get dinner at home, but they qualify for free breakfast and free lunch, right? And so schools are a lifeline for so many families. At the same time, school is torture for some kiddos who, again, don't fit that mold. And so they learn a little bit differently, and they need certain accommodations. They need things kind of tailored a bit to them. That's hard to do in today's schools. They are underfunded, they are overworked, and they are woefully unappreciated. And with that perfect storm, and a kiddo walking in to that perfect storm, they may or may not be getting their needs met in the best way possible, not through any fault of their own, and not necessarily through the fault of the school either. They can only do so much with what they have. And when they've got that perfect storm of underfunded, overworked, underappreciated, it can be damn near impossible to meet everyone's needs. And so some of those kiddos who go in and they're expected to just sort of keep up with their classmates, and for whatever reason, they just can't, they aren't. School is not their place. They're really kind of struggling to keep up. They are consistently every day getting the message they're not good enough. Because when kids walk into the classroom, the assumption is their teacher's going to give them the work that they can do and teach them how to tackle it and get it done, and is going to help guide them on their learning, right? That's the assumption. Anytime a student goes in, the assumption is that the teacher is the teacher's not going to give them anything they can't handle. And so even our kids who go in and are average learners, knocking it out of the park, they sit down for a standardized test. Those standardized tests, for the most part, they're adaptive. And so what that means is they get progressively harder for the student. And that's just to see the ceiling, right? That's to gauge where they're at, like what's left to learn, right? How much have they mastered? And the only way to do that is to get progressively harder until you eventually get so many questions wrong in a row that, here's your ceiling. Here's where you're at. But those tests, it's not explained like that to students. It's not explained, that you're going to walk away from this test feeling bad because you're going to not know what the heck you're doing once you get toward the end of that test. And instead, we're really, and let's face it, this, teachers' performance is gauged on these tests, and it's unfairly, because a standardized test is not an accurate representation of student learning. But, because our systems are slow moving, we haven't caught up with the best way to assess learning. And so we use these standardized tests. And, as a teacher, when you're feeling that pressure to, okay, I have to demonstrate that my kids are learning. That's my whole job, to teach them. So I have to demonstrate that they're learning. And then, you're going to coach the kiddos. Just try your best, do your best, stay focused, eat breakfast, right? And you're stressed out. Kids are going to pick up on that, right? Oh gosh, you know, Miss Teacher, Mrs. Teacher, Mr. Teacher, you know, this is really important. This is really important for them. And so your kiddo's going to go into school really with the intention to do well, because kids do well when they can. And they're going to get to that end of that test feeling like, oh crud, I don't think I did well. Gosh, I hope I don't disappoint Mr. Teacher. I hope Miss Teacher's okay with that, because I don't think it went well. And it's all because we haven't quite explained how the test works to kids. We haven't explained, gosh, those last handful of questions are going to be doozies. You're not even going to know the answer, and that's okay.
Yeah. This really kind of hits a sore spot in my mind a little bit, because, ever since I knew I was having a child, and really kind of, you don't know until you know about things like this, and become a parent and really started understanding what standardized testing was. It's never sat well with me, never, ever. The fact that every kid is put into the same box, and expected to, climb a tree when they're a fish, never, ever, ever sat well with me. And every year I struggle with whether it's a good decision to send my son to essentially a standardized public school. And I did give my hand at homeschooling one time, and it wasn't a good fit at that point in my life. And I don't know that that's the answer anyways, to just say, well, I don't like the system, I'm just going to homeschool, because not all of us as parents are, it's not that we can't teach our children, but that might not be our best role in their life, to be their academic type of instructor, right? But at the same time, when the system doesn't resonate with you as a parent, I feel like you're really stuck in a hard spot, because
absolutely,
like you said, you're kind of undoing things, because, you talk about that standardized test. And I know this could be a whole podcast in and of itself, this rabbit hole of like the public education system, right? And I know that, but it is part of the pressures for kids, because, you talk about that test where they hit that ceiling, but then we're telling our kids, the sky's the limit. You can do whatever you put your attention to, and you can accomplish anything you dream of. And then they're put in this box where it says, nope, there's that cap right here is as far as you can go.
This is as good as you are.
Now, that's so conflicting to me, and it tugs at my heart every time I send him to school, that's kind of the message he's given, even if not directly, right? But then at the same time, I don't want him to feel that way about himself and his potential. Right. So what do you do?
Exactly. That's a really great question. And so I think this is where, we're circling back. This is circling back to that first podcast that we talked about too, of, setting the expectation, letting them know, because our kids, if we do not provide some context for them, they will fill in the gaps, they will fill in the story. And because they have limited life experiences, oftentimes they'll fill it in incorrectly, right? So a kiddo who then hits their cap walks away thinking, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough because I got so many wrong, right? They're walking away with, oh, I got so many wrong. And, it really kind of like, how do we undo that? Well, we let them know ahead of time. You're going to get loads of these questions wrong, and that's okay. This test is really just, and this is how I phrase it with my own children, these tests really are just to see what's left to learn, what's left to teach you. And that's why we need you to try your best. Because if you don't try your best, you're going to get a bunch of stuff wrong that but it's going to look like you don't know it, and we're going to waste your time reteaching it to you.
And that's a great way to say
it. Right. And it pulls the sting out of it, right? It's getting their best, because who wants to waste their time? Who wants to sit through, oh gosh, you mean I'm going to have to sit through like that reading lesson again? Or I'm going to have to sit through that, every kiddo's got like, oh yeah, I don't really like that class. I'm going to have to sit through that class again. So you're getting the best from them without putting so much pressure of, okay, you need to perform. We need to see that how much, you've got to know it all. Like you've got to get as many questions right as possible. That's not what this test is about anyhow. This test is to assess, most of the standardized test is to assess that's what they're purporting to assess learning, right? And so, and I think for some kids, you know, it's a great way to assess learning. For others, not so much.
Yeah.
And so how do we undo that, right? When they're coming home, that's one way, is to front load them, send them in with, you know, we're really going to try our best because we need to know what's left to teach you. And then that disclaimer of you're going to get some of them wrong, and that's okay. That's all right. You'll make some mistakes, but that's okay. And then when they come home, did you, you know, what was it like? Don't, you know, did you try your best? I'd shy away from that. I would ask more about what was it like? What was that test like? And they'll tell you exactly how that test made them feel. Oh, I got, you know, I knew so many of the answers, or I didn't know any of those.
Yeah.
And then you can go from there. Then you know what you're working with. You either are working with a kiddo who does well on standardized tests, and you can say, awesome, like you're going to demonstrate growth, and it's, you know, you are the kid that every teacher dreams to get to have in their classroom. Or you're going to get a kiddo who says, I don't know how I did. And you can offer that reassurance that, you know what, even if you did awful, even if you got all those answers wrong, I still think you're really great at baseball. You're really great at, you know, and this is where those extracurriculars come in handy. Those after school activities, because, you know, so many parents worry about, am I enrolling my kids in too much, or am I not allowing them to be bored enough? Or they worry about, you know, either under enrolling in extracurriculars or over enrolling. And I would say, you know, let your kiddo try whatever they want to try, whatever they're interested in, and wherever they excel, follow that, follow their lead. If they are enjoying that, give them something to be good at, especially those kiddos who struggle at school. Give them something to be good at.
You know, I love that you said that, because I feel like my mindset is, if my kid is struggling in math, let's say, but they are thriving at baseball or art or music, I am less inclined to make them sit day after day after day with a math tutor than I am to say, let's level you up in music that you're enjoying so much. Let's get you involved more with theater that you are so having fun with. Not that I would ignore the struggle bus part of it, but I feel like, why not just help, like you just said, help them excel at what they're actually good at and enjoying, versus forcing them to master what they hate.
When you feel good, you do good.
Yes.
Right? So if I just had an awesome night at baseball, I just hit a home run, I'm going to school tomorrow to tell everybody about it. And maybe not everybody, maybe just my teacher, who, if she can offer that feedback that so many kids crave of, wow, that's awesome, right? When they tell stories, that carries over into school, that carries that self-confidence, right? Parents are always worried about, like, what can I do to increase my child's confidence? Give them something to be confident about. Find out what they're good at and do more of that.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the pressures to be perfect at everything is so overwhelming for adults too. But gosh, I mean, as a kid, thinking back on my own youth, you know, those repercussions for not being on point with everything, you know, I mean, you basically, you basically felt like, you know, a failure, quite honestly. And to just live up to the expectations of being good at everything is just not accurate at all. You know, it just feeds into that not enoughness that I think so many kids are feeling more and more all the time, trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak.
Yes, things move so quickly, and I will say, kids are held to a much higher standard than adults, routinely, by everyone, right? As parents, we get back talk from our kid. Excuse me, please do not talk to me that way. Or, you know, what is up with you? Your behavior is unacceptable. Right? I mean, or sometimes we yell at our kids because we've just absolutely reached our wits end. What happens when our kid yells at us because they've reached their wits end? Whew, unacceptable, right? You're a bad parent if you let that go. And so our kiddos are having these pressures, and they can't even have an off day about it. They can't even, or sometimes even if they're not, yelling at us, or, really struggling, maybe it's coming across as being ungrateful, right? Well, why do I have to go do this thing? I don't want to. And as parents, we want to be like, are you kidding? I paid so much money for you to take this dance class. Get your behind in that dance class, right? And maybe what our kid is telling us is, I need a break. I had a hard day today, but they don't have the words for that just yet.
Right.
And so this is where we get to say, what's up? How come you don't want to go to dance class? You usually like dance class. Are you just needing a break today? Was today a hard day? Right. And instead we're like, no, go, 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 go. Right. Even the classroom. I mean, 6.5 hours, the average school day is 6.5 hours. And they're expected to learn for 6.5 hours. I don't know about you, but I do not do 6.5 hours of work a day.
Isn't that crazy? These standards that we hold our kids to. I mean, we as adults constantly talk about, giving ourselves grace and self-care and self-love and all these things to help nurture our mindsets. And we don't extend that same courtesy to our children most of the time. We just train them to be these little, inline robots. That's so just awakening, those things that you're describing. Another thing that comes to mind with that, and this is just probably more of a side complaint that I have, a pet peeve, but that so many of us try to just leave it at work, leave it at the office. Yet kids come home almost every day with a stack of homework.
Yes.
Which drives me insane.
There's ample research that demonstrates that, I'm blanking out what grade it is, but before a certain grade level, it's not only is it not helpful, but in some cases it's detrimental.
Yeah. They need a break.
And so, yeah. Or I mean, sometimes we try diligently to leave it at the office, but it still follows us. Before we started talking, I was saying how I had a really hard case that I dealt with last week. And so, I left the office and I left the tasky stuff, but that kiddo was still on my mind.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's true for most adults who work, whether you're working outside the home or inside the home, right? Even stay-at-home parents have a nagging thing that didn't get done earlier in the day that, oh gosh, I really have to get to that tomorrow. And so, our kids feel that same, pressure of, oh yeah, there's that thing that didn't get done and I should have done it. And if mom finds out I didn't do it, I'm gonna be in trouble. And also I think this is why as adults, we hit adulthood and we sometimes do burn out because we've never been taught how to slow down and how to take care of us. And what does self-care mean? I mean, oftentimes we learn self-care means, getting your hair done, your nails done, going to a salon, spending money. Why do we feel like self-care requires money? Because we've learned about self-care from the ad industry. That's why we feel like self-care takes money, because our parents never taught us what self-care was. And we're currently not teaching our kids what self-care is, right? Hey, if you need to stay home from school today because it's all just too much, let's do that, right? Because maybe our kid can't perform at the same rate as every other kid in the class and they need to tap out for a day. Or maybe they need to go to school and then you pick them up during their lunch hour and you eat McDonald's in the car. And then you send them back in, right, for recess and the rest of the day. Lunch is short. In school nowadays, lunch is very short. And so pick up fast food, meet them and pull them out. Your child's eyes when they get to your car for a car picnic, good golly. I mean, and then pair that with I missed you today. And so I picked you up for, they're still going to have that downtime with their friends at recess. They're still going to have those, they're not missing out on anything but the lunch table. And as long as you're not doing it routinely, no one's going to call you out on it, but your kid is going to remember it. Mom, remember that one time when in third grade you came and took me out to lunch? Or do you remember that one time?
Yeah, that's amazing too, because I've said it a lot in the past that kids don't get to pick their memories. We as adults don't get to pick our memories. And to be able to create that type of moments in time where something special happened, creating those moments where we are giving our kids grace under the pressures of everything else around them. I think that's so important.
And I think memories really stand out. Like things become a memory when it's something unique, when it's something that doesn't happen often. Or it's like a tradition. It's something that happens all the time.
Right.
But if it's something that's done pretty routinely, it just becomes part of the pattern, and patterns kind of fall by the wayside. Our brain loves different, right? Our brain is suspicious of different. It makes memories of different, right? But I would say that this actually leads to like our next podcast that I think we've got coming down the pipeline about parenting, right? And some of those pressures related to parenting. And I think oftentimes parents do feel that pressure to make their kids' childhood just magical and perfect in every way. And I think sometimes we drive ourselves bonkers trying to do that as well. So if picking your kid up for lunch is not an option because you work, or there's something else that's, on your agenda that just gets in the way of doing that, find something else. Find something else. Maybe it's just picking them up from school at all, right? You're usually not the one, or they drive the bus home. That's where the memories and the magical childhood moments come in. It's where when you give your child that permission to let their hair down, metaphorically speaking, and just be themselves and do something that you don't normally, quote unquote, allow, right? You don't get to sneak out of school to have McDonald's in the car parking lot. Like that's it's not necessarily against the rules, but it's different.
Yeah. I think we as parents can, if we really take the time to get creative about what it is we can provide in regards to experiences that our kid would really enjoy and appreciate, we all could find that time, that space, in that moment. For sure.
Yeah. And I always, even if there's nothing else that you can do, like you're just so strapped, you can't go above or beyond or do anything different in any way, shape, or form. Okay, that's fine. We can live with that. Instead, just be excited to see your child. Every time they walk into a room, just be excited. Even if you got called in to the principal's office because your kid did something they shouldn't be doing, walk into that principal's office. As soon as you lock eyes with your kid, smile. Hey, are you okay? Because they're probably not. They know they're in trouble. And so
that's so good though.
Just, if your eyes, I believe it was Toni Morrison who said, how do you respond to your child when they walk into a room? Are you annoyed at their presence? Or are you, think of when someone's happy to see you.
Right. I was just going to say that, like, what do you want for yourself when you walk into a room, when you walk in and your partner or spouse is there, or your best friend? Like, you want them to just like not look up from their phone and let you walk in the house and not acknowledge you? That sucks, right? Your kid doesn't want that either.
No. So, as soon as you are reunited from, after school, or like I said, if you're called down to the principal's office, we need to know that your love is unconditional, even when they are a jerk sitting in the principal's office because they did something they shouldn't have done, and you're mortified as a parent. You still love them. You could, maybe strangle them a little bit, but you do still love them. They're yours. And we have to convey that, because if we don't, again, they make up the story, they fill in the ending. And what ending do you want them to fill in? When it's all said and done, you want them to be like, Yeah, I never really doubted that my mom loved me. I never really doubted that my dad was happy to see me.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. So many different things come to mind regarding pressures on our kids, everything from little P's to big P's.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd love your opinion on today is when we were kids, we
Mhm.
did things like tornado drills, fire drills. Now we do active shooter drills.
We do.
Um, Recently, I was reading more about this and the effects that it has on our kids. And I feel like studies are showing that more often than not, this is harmful to our
Yeah.
kids. The pressures that it puts on them to essentially save their own lives or save the lives of those around them
Yeah.
is just unprecedented for our kids to have to endure that type of responsibility. What is your standpoint and what is your thought on that?
Oh, I have so many thoughts on that.
I know this is heavy and I don't know that I know I kind of threw this
I know
curveball in there, but it's just something that
it's a pressure that
it
we
is,
need
and it's
to
more and
acknowledge.
more. It's like no no community is exempt.
Yep.
No group of people is exempt. Everybody in every school and not even just schools, it happens everywhere now, is at risk for this. And it's just such a common thing in our world now that, I can't even believe that we have to talk to our kids about this, but we do.
We do. We do. And my longstanding opinion has always been that they cause more harm than good. There are loads of disasters that happen much more frequently. Um, and we don't practice for those. So why are we practicing for something that statistically speaking is rare, but no one is immune from, right? So it's always this delicate balance of recognizing our communities. I don't care where you live, our communities are not immune to this. And so we are at the same level of risk as everyone else, although it is a very low risk. Um, I think that there are much, much better ways. And an ounce of prevention, right? I'm a big proponent of prevention. And in many of these instances, these are children who um, they check certain boxes, and I think oftentimes the professionals involved in their lives are afraid to tell parents, hey, your child is exhibiting concerning behavior, or it only comes out later, oh yeah, they XYZ. But as long as we're talking about this, I will say it has nothing to do with mental health. um, there are this is not a mental health problem. I want to be unequivocal there. The American Psychological Association, the American Counseling Association, they've all come out and with statements regarding school shootings. And while these individuals are typically struggling or suffering in some sort of way, not everyone who has the diagnoses that these people may or may not even have are going to behave in the way that these people have chosen to behave. I think one of the biggest things that predict, or I guess some of the biggest characteristics that individuals who choose to commit school shootings share, their characteristics of being a loner. And it's typically not by choice. It's typically that they've been ostracized or bullied in some sort of way. And they also are ultra sensitive to some of that feedback. And so they perceive slights where there maybe are no slights, or they perceive that they've been wronged like many, 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 many times. And perhaps they have. And so, a lot of these shooters have fallen through the cracks in that society has failed them. Their needs have gone unmet. They have been justifiably slighted in many different ways, and they feel no connection to anyone. How many times has there been a school shooting story that came out of, well, I was nice to him and he didn't shoot me? Or a teacher who was spared because they had a relationship with the child. If we want less school shootings, we need to look at our gun laws. I know some people do not like to hear that, but it's the reality of the situation. And we also need to look at the quality of the relationships our children have. A lot of these kids don't really have quality relationships with any adults in their life. They don't have parents whose eyes light up when they walk into the room. On the contrary, they're burdens. They are consistently told they're not good enough. They're slighted. They have a vendetta. They're looking for revenge for the pain that they're experiencing. And so I think it's not mental health. This is, systemic failure after systemic failure after systemic failure. And we need to wake up and look at the quality of relationships that our kids have. And we need to look at our gun laws.
Everybody that's listening, if you hadn't yet listened to Angie and my first conversation regarding the importance of adults that your child connects with in their lives, now is absolutely the time to go back and listen to that. Whether it's you or another trusted person, coach, teacher, aunt, grandma, grandpa, whoever it is, she brings it up again. It's Angie, it's so relevant that your kid needs somebody to connect with, an adult, a responsible, trusting adult in their lives. And we need to get past our own egos if it doesn't happen to be us as their parents.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that today. And I know we kind of are ending this on a little bit of a heavy topic. But everything you shared today was just so relevant, and I could talk to you for hours about all of this.
I know.
I know.
It's a heavy topic.
We'll meet again.
Pressures.
Yeah.
Pressures are a heavy topic.
Yeah, for sure. It's heavy, but it's so relevant, and just reeling in our kids so that they find the space in their lives to be who they are amongst the pressures of everything, and know that they're enough, even if
it's okay to slow down. It's okay to slow down. You don't have to keep up with everyone else.
Yeah. That's so good. I'm so grateful for you and your insight and your help to the youth and the families.
Yeah. Well, thank you for allowing me to hijack your platform here. I feel like I do a lot of talking, and for someone who doesn't really enjoy the way they sound on audio, I sure do a lot of talking when I connect with you. I don't know what it is about you, Sarah, but
I'm glad you feel comfortable in this space, because I love hearing you talk, and everything you say is so important. So everybody, the way to connect with Angie will be in the show notes. Benchmark Counseling is where you can find her. She is local to Northwest Indiana, Munster, Indiana specifically, and connect with her team if you and your kiddos are looking for support. And you can find her here and on her social platforms, and hopefully here again in the future. Angie, thank you so much for your amazing insight today.
Thank you for having me.
Till next time.
Bye.